finish the story. You've been trying to track me down, spreading my story on the internet, coming up with your theories as to what Asili really is. You were all wrong. You want to know how the story ends? Fine, I'll tell you. But everything I've told you so far, the fence, the grey men, our friends lost inside Asili. Everything that comes next is what I've been afraid to tell, the stuff of nightmares. We'd passed through the barrier and entered the darkness on the other side. I woke up. All I could see was the tops of the trees high above me. They were that tall, I couldn't even see where they ended. I couldn't even see the sky. I remember not knowing where I was. I couldn't even remember how I'd ended up in this jungle. I hear Angela's voice and I see her and Ty standing above me. I didn't even remember who they were at first. I think they knew that because Angela asks me if I know where we are. I take a look at my surroundings and I see the jungle. We were surrounded on all sides by a never-ending maze of almost identical trees. They were large and unusually shaped, like the trunks were twisted and the branches were like the bodies of snakes, and everything was dim, not dark, but dim. It all comes back to me, the river, the jungle, the fence, the grey men. We were on the other side. We were in the Asili. We're here to look for the others, for Nadia. I take another look around and I realized we're right bang in the middle of the jungle, as if we'd already been trekking through it. I asked Ty and Angela where the fence had gone, but they had asked me the same thing. They didn't know. They said all the trees, they said all three of us woke up on the jungle floor, but didn't wake for another good hour. This didn't make any sense. I started freaking out and Ty and Angela tried to calm me down. Not knowing what to do next, we decided we needed to find which way the rest of the commune went. Angela said they would have tried to find a way back to the fence, and so we needed to head south. The only problem was we didn't know which way south was. The jungle was too dark, and we couldn't even use the sun because we couldn't see it. The only way we could find where south was to guess. Following what we hoped was south, we walked for days through the dimness of the jungle, continually having to climb over the large roots of the trees, and although the jungle was flat, we felt as though we had been going up a continual incline. As the days went by, me, Ty, and Angela began to recognize the same things. Every tree we had passed was almost identical in a way. They were the same size, same shape, and even the same sort of contortion. But what was even stranger to us, stranger than the identical trees, was the sound. No sound at all, none at all. No birds singing in the trees, no monkeys howling. Even by our feet there were no insects of any kind. The jungle was dead quiet. This only sound came from us, from our footsteps, our exhausted breaths. It was as if nothing lived here, as if nothing even existed on this side of the fence. Even though we knew something was seriously wrong with the jungle, we had no choice but continue, either to find the others or to find the fence. We were so exhausted that we lost count of the number of days we had been trekking. Even Angela forgot. On one of those days, I felt as though I reached my breaking point. It had been lagging behind the others for the past. I had been lagging behind the others for the past 2 days. I couldn't feel my legs anymore, only pain. I struggled to breathe with the humidity that was still here on this side of the jungle. I'd already used up all my water from my backpack, and I was too scared to sleep. side of the fence. I was afraid the dreams would be far more intense, though the dim daylight of the jungle wasn't. I wasn't sure if I was seeing things, hearing things. What fueled me was to keep going. What fueled me to keep going was to find Nadia, and not even that. To find what was here, what was calling me. It didn't even matter anymore because I was done. It all became too much for me. The pain, the exhaustion, the heat. I decided I was done. By the time the huge roots of some trees collapsed, I collapsed down, knowing I wouldn't be getting up anytime soon. Realizing I wasn't behind them, Ty and Angela came back for me. They berated me to get back on my feet and start walking. We didn't have time on our side after all. I told them I couldn't. I just couldn't carry on anymore. I told them I couldn't. I just couldn't carry on anymore. I just needed time to rest. Hoping the two of them would be somewhat sympathetic, that's when Ty suddenly started screaming at me. He accused me of not taking responsibility and that all this mess was my fault. He was blaming me. Too tired to argue, I just simply told him to fuck off. But he wasn't having it. He said he hated guys like me that didn't follow things through or some shit like that. I reminded him that we both chose to go beyond the fence, not just me. Angela told us to stop. She said we didn't have time for this shit. Ty, clearly wanting to leave nothing unsaid, he brought Nadia into it. Claimed Nadia didn't really want to be with me. He said that the commune didn't have enough members and that Nadia tricked me into going. That later down the line she would break up with me once the commune was a success. I didn't believe him, but I was pissed. I called him a liar. I said to him that the others just couldn't stand to see one of their own with a white guy. And that's when he said it, that what I'd suspected all along. And that's when he said it, what I'd suspected all along. He didn't hate me just because I was with Nadia. He hated me because he was with Nadia. Wait, what? He didn't hate me because I was with Nadia. He hated me because he was with Nadia. She didn't end things with me because we were drifting apart, or this fucking trip to Africa. It was because she was with him. It was all a lie. I risked my life for her, for a lie. She was cheating. I think all three of us knew where this was going, and before it did, Angela tried shutting the whole thing down. She told me to get the fuck up and for Ty to keep walking. She said we're not doing this now. She knew. She already fucking knew. Ty already finished what he had to say, but I was done with him. Despite how tired I was, I got to my feet and shouted after him. I demanded to know if it was true. He didn't answer me. He just kept walking. Even though he had his back turned to me, I saw that stupid grin on his face. Wanting to make him angry, I got right behind him and I shoved him. In the back as hard as I could. It worked. Ty turns and gets in my face. He warns me not to get into it with him, wanting to get further under his skin. I then say it doesn't matter if he was with Nadia or not, because one thing was still true. Confused to what I was talking about, I then said to him, it's true what they say, you know. Once you go white, all the rest are shine. Expecting Ty to punch my lights out, he instead tackles me hard breath back, and just as I think I'm safe from passing out, I feel something underneath me. I get up on all fours, and underneath me is a pile of dead leaves, but there's something hard beneath it. I press down on the leaves, and something feels almost metallic. Sound comes back in my ears, and I can hear Angela shouting at me, feeling something underneath me. I brush away the dead leaves, and what I find is a fence. Not the same fence we passed through, but an old rusty wire fence. Angela and I realizes we've stumbled onto something, and they come over to help brush away the dead leaves. We discover beneath the leaves an old and very long metal fence lining the jungle. An old, very long metal fence lining the jungle floor, which eventually ends at some broken hinges. But that's not all we found. Further down the fence, Angela found a sign, a big red sign on the fence with the words written on it. It was hard to read because of the rust, but the first word said danger. The other two words were in French, but I knew enough French to understand what it meant. The sign said danger, keep out. We made camp that night and discussed the metal fence in full. Angela suggested that the fence may have been put there for some sort of contaminant, that inside this part of the jungle was some deadly disease, and that's why we hadn't come across any animal life. But if that's true, why was the metal fence this far in? Why wasn't it where the wooden fence was? Where this dark part of the jungle began? It just didn't make any sense. Angela then suggested that we may even have crossed into another dimension, and that's why the jungle was now darker and uninhabitable. Uninhabited. And could maybe explain why we passed out upon entering it. We didn't have any answers, just theories. We trekked again for the next couple of days, and our food supply was running dangerously low. We'd used up all our water by now, but luckily the jungle had rain, and it was more than moist for us to soak whatever we could from the leaves. You wouldn't believe how fucking good leafy moist water tastes after a day of thirst. Nothing seemed like it could get any worse. This dim, dead jungle was just a never-ending labyrinth of the same fucking trees over and over. Every day was the fucking same. Walk through the jungle, rest at night, fucking Groundhog Day. We might as well have been walking in circles. But that's when Angela came up with a plan. Her plan was to climb up a tree until we found ourselves at the very top, in the hopes of finding wherever this jungle ended any sliver of civilization or anything. I grew up in London. I had never seen trees this big, and what's worse, I was terrified of heights. The tree was easy enough to climb because of the irregular shape. The only problem was I didn't know if the treetops even ended. They were like massive fucking beanstalks. We started climbing the tree, and we must have been climbing for half an hour before we finally found something. Not even halfway up the tree, Angela ahead of us tells us to stop. We ask what's wrong, but she doesn't answer. She's just staring over a long snake-like branch. Me and Ty see it. It wasn't a branch she was staring at. It was what's on the branch. We didn't know what it was at first, and so we got closer to it. It was some sort of white material hanging from the branches, almost like a string puppet. And whatever this thing was, it was extremely long. It might have been 50 feet. We still didn't know what the hell this thing was, and so Angela gets close enough to feel it. She could barely describe to us what it felt like, but she said it was almost rubbery in texture. But eventually we realized what it was. When we did, it made all of our skins crawl. It was a snake skin. was up here in the trees, then it was probably in the trees. We climbed down from the tree immediately. If this snake was still around, we didn't want to be around when it found us. We thought we knew the answers now. We thought we knew why this place was contained. A massive 50 fucking feet long snake. It seemed big enough to swallow a cow. If this snake was in here, then what else was in here? More snakes. Worse. Is that why the Grey Men warned us to stay away from this place? Is that why Nadia and the others were thrown in here as some sort of sacrifice to it? We thought we were finally beginning to solve the mystery of this place, but we were wrong. Dead wrong. I didn't sleep a handful of those nights. As terrified as the dreams made me, I still wanted answers. Ty and Angela thought we found them, and even though I knew we hadn't, I let them keep believing it. For some reason, I was too afraid to tell them about my dreams. Maybe they also had the same dreams, but like me, kept it to themselves. But I needed answers. How had I foreseen the fence? What was the tree? What was the tree with the face? The crucified man. I needed answers. I needed it. That night, knowing there was a huge prehistoric-sized snake that could take any of us at any minute, I chose not to sleep. We usually took turns during the night to keep watch, but I kept watch that whole night. All night I stared into the pure black darkness around us, just wondering what the hell was out there waiting for us. I stared into the darkness, and it was as if the darkness was just staring back at me, laughing at me. Whatever it was that brought me into this place, it must have been watching me. I guessed it was now probably the earliest hours of the morning, but pure darkness was still all around. The fire had gone out, and I couldn't see anything, not even my own hands. Like every night in this place, it was dead quiet, but then I hear something. It was so faint, but it was so faint I could barely hear it. It must have been so far away. I thought maybe my sleep deprivation was causing me to hear things again, but the sound seemed to be getting louder, just so slightly. Like everyone was turning up a car radio, like someone was turning up a car radio inch by inch. The sound was clearer to me now, but I couldn't even describe it to myself. It was like a vibration getting louder ever so slightly. As the minutes passed by, I quickly realized this wasn't some vibration. It was a wail. It was like a wailing, a distant but loud, ghostly wail. A distant but loud, ghostly wail. It was getting louder, closer, close enough that I knew I had to wake up Angela. She was deep in sleep, but I managed to kick her awake. Almost instantly, she heard the sound and was alert to it. We both listened. It was getting closer. We woke up Ty, and the three of us looked around to find which way the wails were coming from. It seemed to be coming from all around us. We quickly get our things and got the hell out of there, but wherever we went, the sound was following us amongst the darkness. It was so loud by now that we couldn't even hear one another. We put our headlights on and followed behind Angela, but no matter where we went, it just seemed like we were heading directly towards the sound, barely able to see anything. We were stopped in our tracks by a large tree root, and we desperately had to climb over it because the wailing was now directly behind our backs. I struggled to climb over her, and I could hear Angela yelling, "Come on, hurry!" We ran down the other side of the tree, thinking we finally managed to outrun the sound, but it was waiting for us. We ran directly into it. We ran into the sound, and I realized what it was. It was people, dozens and dozens of them, all around us from my headlights. I could see their faces, men, women, children, the elderly. They were barely clothed in torn pieces of clothing, and they were so skinny. They were basically just skin and bones. Their eyes were pure white, like Angela's groans, I then hear what sounds like gunshots. The aimless zombie people on top of me start to move away, but my body is still pinned down. I then feel an arm, and it was Angela holding a revolver. She drags me to my feet. She shoots more of them, and the entire horde are scared off. Once we find Ty, we just leg it out of there, shooting or shoving the zombie people out of our way. We ran so far that the sound of their groans was almost gone. We kept running through the darkness as far away as we could from them. I was ready to collapse, but I was too afraid to stop. But then, we did stop. The ground beneath us suddenly wasn't there anymore, and I feel myself falling. For a few seconds, we were just weightless before we crashed back down against the ground. I was in so much pain. I could feel leaves and dirt all over me, and when I tried to crawl up on my knees, I reached out to feel something in front of me. It was like a wall, a dirt wall, all around us. Realizing we've fallen into something, I look up with my headlight and see we've fallen into a 10 feet hole. I could see glimpses of Ty next to me. I could hear him moaning in pain, but I couldn't hear or see Angela. I look up again with my headlight, and I see Angela pulling herself out of the hole. She must have managed to hold on to the edge. Once she was on the surface, me and Ty yelled out for her, but all Angela could do was stare down at the hole, clueless on how she would get us out. Being trapped down there wasn't the worst of our problems. The groans had returned. We could hear them up there. It now sounded like there were hundreds of them, gaining closer. We were too far down to see Angela's face, but we saw her headlight moving frantically back and forth from us and the oncoming wails. We yelled out for her again, but she couldn't hear us. We were too far down, and the sounds on the surface were too loud. Angela was shouting something back down to us, but we couldn't hear it either. I can't be certain what she said, but I think it was, "I'm sorry." And before the wails could reach her, Angela's headlight was gone. She had left us. She left us to the wails, to the dozens or even hundreds of zombie people. She left me alone with Ty. We were now down there for what felt like hours. Our headlights had died, leaving us both trapped in pure darkness, and for hours all we heard was the painful noise from the people above our heads. It was like fucking torture. I felt like I was going mad from it. Even though Ty was right next to me, I couldn't help but feel like I was completely alone down there, with only darkness and the endless wails taking us, and even Angela's place. But then the darkness gave us something, a light, a faint, warm orange light, 10 feet above our heads. It was the reflection of fire. It seemed like it was moving repetitively around the edges of the circle. Ty must have seen it too, because suddenly I can feel him hitting me, getting my attention. And if there was a fire, then there was people, real people. Even though it was useless, I tried yelling over the wails to whoever might be there. If the two of us wanted out of this hole, this was our only chance. But then something changed. The groans of the zombie people began to die down. Some of it changed into what sounded like screams. They were all screaming. But over the screams, I then heard what sounded like growls, deep, aggressive animal growls, like roaring. Roar. There was something else up there, as if all at once the screams and thudding of footsteps above us suddenly just vanished away. Back into the darkness where they came. But we could still hear them. Outside of the burning orange ring, we could hear the ones who didn't get away. We could hear them being ripped apart, eaten. We were no longer trapped by the endless wails. We were now trapped by something else, something apparently worse, something that could rip us apart. monsters. And I did find Nadia, but we almost wished we hadn't. We knew there were monsters inside of this jungle now, and we did find our way out of the hole. But it wasn't the monsters that was waiting for us on the surface, not the monsters you're thinking of. What we found in that jungle wasn't the monsters, it was men. White men. End of part 3. That's terrifying. Okay, so the fuck? There's a group of white men. What? Eating people? Next Sunday is gonna be the last part of this series. I'm kind of excited. This one was a little bit more scary than the others, but still not so much that I feel like I can't sleep tonight. It was just kind of exciting, you know. Felt like it had been leading up to this point up until now, but anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you sleep